Hi, my name is Micah Akulian. I'm a holistic and spiritual counselor. You can find my link to my website in the description below. And I want to share today my experience of spiritual awakening, which happened about 10 years ago. And it happened after reading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, Uncovering Your Life's Purpose. And it was a beautiful experience. It was amazing. It changed my life. And it happened over the course of a few weeks of listening to his book on my iPod. So to give a little backstory, before that time I had been really sick with ulcerative colitis, and I have another video about my healing from ulcerative colitis. That's an autoimmune condition of your intestines. I had been really depressed, really anxious, and basically just in survival mode for so long. I had ulcerative colitis for 8 years, and I had experienced some kind of early childhood trauma. I don't know if you consider it trauma necessarily. My father died in a car accident when I was 12, but it happened right at a point in my life where I was very vulnerable. I was like in a transitional stage in my life, and so it had a big impact on me. So the first part of my life was pretty challenging, having my father die and then having ulcerative colitis for 8 years. But it all led up to this point where I got so depressed and felt so disconnected, felt so tired of being alive, really. And it was that suffering and that psychological and emotional anguish that catalyzed the awakening process. So as I was reading this book, or listening to the book on the iPod, and really implementing the information that he was talking about, I was applying the information to my own experience. And what Eckhart talks about is the ego. The ego is as the structure in your mind, the conceptual framework for how we experience ourselves and the world around us. And that framework is very helpful in some ways. It helps us navigate the physical world. We have thoughts about what things are. We label things, categorize things, judge things, and it all helps us navigate the physical world. It helps us get things done, be productive. But ultimately, it doesn't help us understand ourselves. It doesn't help us understand or feel or experience the depths of who we are in our essence. And so at the time when I came across these teachings, I didn't really have much context for that deeper spiritual experience. I was living mostly in my mind. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd have lots of thoughts about things, lots of them negative and kind of bad and judgmental of myself and other people, and that's just how I thought life was. And from that perspective, it always feels really real. You always think that what you're feeling and thinking is true. It's an accurate representation of reality. But as you begin to understand how the ego works and see that it's just patterns of conditioned thought, much of it influenced by our family, by the culture, you realize that it's not actually who you are. It's just one version of yourself that you're creating unconsciously, or maybe consciously sometimes, but it's not actually who you are. So it's hugely liberating. And as I started listening to these teachings, I went through this unraveling. My psyche just unraveled. I started seeing all these negative patterns in my mind, and I recognized that every thought that I was having was just a little story about myself and about reality that really didn't have any inherent truth in it. It was just one version of reality in myself. So in those moments I'd become very alert, and I'd look around and I'd take a deep breath, and I'd sort of feel the gravity of what I just recognized, that I was engaged in this story telling to myself. And I did that religiously or spiritually for 2 weeks, basically. Every day I'd put on the iPod, I'd listen to the teachings about the ego, and just had this massive unraveling of my psyche. And every day was the priority during the day was just to get clear and free from all of these cords, patterns, cords of energy that I'm clinging on to. So after those 2 weeks, something kind of magical happened. I went to this internship that I was going to start. It was the first day of the internship, and it was for a counseling internship in South San Francisco at a high-risk school for developmentally delayed young men. So people with kind of mood disturbances and developmental issues and low income. So it was like a pretty intense group of people to work with, and I was really not in the right space to be starting that internship. But what happened at the internship is, because I was practicing being really present and not listening to the story in my mind and just like being with what was, as we were going around the room, people were talking about themselves, introducing themselves. It was like a group of the other counselors, the head of the program, the head of the school, because the program was in a school. Everyone was introducing themselves, telling their story, and I was just listening and watching my mind the whole time. And then it came time for me to talk, and normally I would sort of kind of fumble through something about my history, my schooling, and that was also part of my suffering in this life, is every time I try and talk about myself or talk about things the way that so many other people do, it often wouldn't feel authentic. It often felt like hollow. And so I was sitting in this meeting, like watching that happen and recognizing that I didn't want to do that anymore. I did not want to speak from a place that wasn't true. So I just stopped and I asked myself, what's one thing in this moment that I actually feel is true? And I kind of looked around the room, and there was a bowl of fruit on the table. And so it just kind of spontaneously came out. I just said, I like fruit. And then I started crying. All this emotion came out. And I think it was because for so long I had been holding all this stuff in, just repressing and like distorting my expression so I'd fit in, so I would seem acceptable, socially acceptable to people. And so in that moment, what was happening was that filter in my mind, I wasn't listening to it anymore. And instead I was allowing myself to just spontaneously express myself, which to the mind seems like a really scary thing. But in that moment, it was like this huge release in my heart. I felt just so relieved to be not scared anymore, to let myself just be. So I started crying in the meeting, and it was kind of an amazing scene, because I looked up and everyone just had this like kind of stunned look on their face, like what just happened, because I basically just said I like fruit and started crying. And so the head of the program said, let's take a little break. We took like a 10-minute break. I went to her office with her and told her I'd been listening to Eckhart Tolle, and she was like, yeah, I get that. I totally understand. I left the building, and we agreed I wasn't going to come back. Wasn't in the right headspace. So I left the meeting, and as I was walking out of the building, I could actually feel this like energy moving up my body. It was like a decompression. It felt like, especially my shoulders, felt like the energy like coming upwards. Felt really good, and at the same time my perception somehow shifted, and I started like seeing colors. And actually that happened in the meeting too, which was part of why I think I was in such an altered state. Was as I was watching everyone talk in the meeting, I was seeing and feeling their energy so strongly. I saw like swirls of pink and purple and blue coming out of people as they were talking. And I was just in amazement. I was continuing to practice not judging, not making any stories about what I was experiencing, but just feel it and have the experience. But by the time I got outside, it was really intense, and the energy in the sky, I could see like swirls of color. The trees were just like beautiful, this beautiful, brilliant colors coming out of the trees. And I was driving home and I was crying, and I was like so happy that I was experiencing all this, because the feeling of it was like that I was connected to all of it. The feeling was that I was connected to the sky and the trees and even the people in the meeting, and it was so profound. It was so like nothing I had really experienced or could remember experiencing in this lifetime. So just tremendous happiness. I just felt like alive and connected. So crying, happy, driving, and when I got home, I basically just passed out. I cried some more, and then I went to bed. And I slept for I don't know how long, but I slept till the next morning. I woke up a couple times, but went back to bed. And then the next morning when I woke up, it was like a new world. I remember the first sounds I heard were a bird chirping, and it was like a different experience of hearing a bird chirping. Like, it was so vibrant, the sound of it, and the feeling of the bird. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, and from a Western perspective, or one perspective, is that I had some kind of breakdown, and my mind like cracked, and that's kind of what happened. I had this breakdown where my mind stopped functioning the way that it had been accustomed to functioning, and it opened up my perceptions to experience a more expanded version of, or more expanded reality of what's going on around us all the time. So that heightened perceptual experience that I had lasted for like a month, where I would see colors and I'd see auras of people, and I'd like hear people's thoughts really intensely, just like feel energy really intensely. And most of it was just beautiful. Like, I felt so enlivened by it, and so connected through that experience. But then over the course of about a month, and I was just in this blissful state during that time. I'd get up in the morning. I was living in San Francisco. I'd get up, I'd put my shoes on, I'd go outside and just like walk for the day with no intentions of what to do, where to go. I would just walk, and I'd look at things, and I'd sit down and just watch people and watch the trees, and the whole experience of it was so new. It felt like I was reborn. And maybe in the Christian lineage, that idea of being reborn is something similar to that experience that I had, where you connect with God or the universe, and everything, it becomes new again. So that's what it was happening, and it was beautiful. The memories I have from that time are like the most expansive memories, most expansive experiences that I think I've ever had in this lifetime. Those feelings of like just such expansion. But what happened over the course of about a month is that my mind and the unintegrated parts of my psyche and my emotional body kind of came flooding back. And it happened slowly over that course of that month. I'd have these little thoughts like, oh, what if this goes away? Or am I going crazy? What's happening to me? And I just noticed I'd have those thoughts, and then they started happening with more frequency. Like, the more I'd focus on them, then the more they'd come back. So after a month, the intense bliss and ecstasy of that initial awakening experience was gone. But I was left with this process that I had to go through that lasted years, of like rooting through all of this mental and emotional junk that was like crowding my mind and my emotional field. And that was a pretty challenging process. A lot of like real intense highs and lows, dark and light. And also I had a kundalini awakening around the same time. It was like a couple months before this experience. But the kundalini awakening also like activated or initiated this like deeper awareness of life, and also opened up my conscious awareness to these deeper energies that were within me. So that's kind of like the big shift that happened. And then after that, my life just totally changed. I began to feel the connection between everything. Feel my connection with God and the universe. Feel my connection with animals and plants and other people. And sometimes that's been really challenging, because what you're feeling, especially with people, is you're feeling a lot of the repressed energy that they haven't dealt with. And so many people are just carrying around so much, and they're not even aware of it. But when you talk to them, you can feel the heaviness, the density of their energy. And so there's this whole art form to like understanding how to navigate that, how to not let it affect your energy system. But what you begin to understand as you go through a process like this is that everything is energy. Emotions and thoughts are just energy. And so when you create a thought or you create an emotion, you're sending out this little signal, a little burst of energy, and people around you can pick up on it, but it's also non-localized. It's going out through the universe, and this is like quantum mechanics, that it's not time and space are not what we think they are, and we actually can communicate and connect beyond time and space, which you've probably had that experience where you think of someone and then they call you or they email you. It happens so much to a lot of people. It's far beyond coincidence, and I've had just the most amazing synchronicities happen so many times that it's beyond, for me now, beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is a real phenomenon, that we actually are connected beyond time and space. So everything that awakened in me, all the sensitivity and the awareness, has been reaffirmed in my experience. I've experienced it to be true since that time. And then another phenomenon that's happened that's definitely worth mentioning is the resistance. The initial awakening, I had like no resistance because it just, I cracked open. But then as my mind came back in and the patterns started to kind of reemerge from the past, there was a lot of resistance, a tremendous amount of resistance sometimes, to continuing to do the work, to be present, to let go of attachment, to let go of judgment. All of it requires a lot of intention and a lot of practice. Like you're practicing in moments when old patterns of fear, contraction, judgment want to arise and distort your expression. You're practicing staying open. You're practicing dropping any kind of thought that would limit your expression of yourself. So it's a beautiful process. It's not something that you can force or try and make happen, but you can facilitate the process by being aware, by bringing as much self-awareness to yourself, to your life, as you possibly can. And there's a lot of spiritual teachings that help facilitate that. Eckhart Tolle is one great teacher. There's been a lot of people who've had really significant awakening experiences through his content. I wrote a book. I'll put the link to my book in the description below too. I wrote a book about my experience awakening, and then just all the information about the ego and how to different techniques and tools for transcending your ego. But there's no real formula for it. It's different for everybody. But meditation certainly is like a foundational piece of that. And then now I also counsel people. So if you're interested in receiving counseling, you can also reach out to me. So thank you for watching, listening, and bless you.